On the night of April 17, 1897, a blazing trail split the sky above quiet Aurora. The windmill shuddered as a fiery object crashed into the well. By morning, townsfolk found twisted wreckage and a small body unlike anything of this earth. Northern Texas, spring of 1897. Aurora was a settlement no larger than a scattering of streets, 2 general stores, a blacksmith, and the tall skeletons of windmills straining into the wide sky. Life unfolded in predictable rhythms, Sunday services followed by trading in the square, weekdays filled with the monotony of tending to livestock, crops, and repairs. News arrived late, passed from hand to hand, often yellowed before it reached the town. By April, stories of aerial contraptions, called airships in the papers, filtered down from Dallas and Wichita Falls. The accounts were terse, sometimes confident, sometimes absurd, but they were spreading. Lights in the night sky, cigar-shaped machines with wings, unfamiliar mechanical sounds carried on winds not tied to thunder or trains. The night of April 17th carried no storm clouds. The air held a steady warmth, the orchards rustled with ordinary sounds, and no interruption unsettled the silence. 8 miles west, a postal coach passed without delay along the bridge road. The bakery's night watchman heard nothing beyond the expected ticks of his clock. The mill's attendant, who kept guard against fire, noted only a faint vibration he could not place, too low in pitch to be wagon wheels, too continuous to be explained by any human design. At scattered farmhouses, families slept without disturbance. The dogs did not bark. The only landmark of distinction within Aurora was the windmill of Judge J.S. Proctor, a structure visible from across the fields. Its wooden vanes creaked in their usual pattern, powering a lifting mechanism that fed water from a stone-lined cistern beneath. The well supplied both household and garden, its workings long familiar to the town. Iron rods, gears, and the worm joint were all maintained with habitual precision, a machine so integrated into life that its regular groans blended with the background of crickets and the shifting air. The ledger of the store for April 16th recorded purchases of flour, salt, kerosene, items so ordinary they confirmed the expectation of nothing unusual on the horizon. The morning broke in unaltered cadence until a faint, irregular glow appeared along the eastern edge of the sky. It was not the bright announcement of sunrise, but a weak, unsteady shimmer, as though a lantern had been lifted too near the ground. By the church clock, the hour was marked close to 6. With the glow came a sound, thick and strange. It was neither whistle nor roar, but a pulsing exhalation, like great bellows drawing in and expelling air. The rhythm rose and collapsed with uneven intervals, as if the breath belonged to something immense and unsteady. A sudden rush of air snapped a pear branch from its trunk, though no storm gathered overhead. The few who looked eastward at that hour would later recall not brilliance, but a kind of oppressive presence, a disturbance in the familiar pattern of dawn. Yet no one approached, and no one spoke aloud, as though the silence of the animals and the steady toll of the church bell demanded restraint. Aurora woke beneath the weight of an occurrence it could not yet name, carried in on the unbroken wind. The incident was preserved in 2 registers, spoken testimony and the printed word. The Dallas Morning News, several days later, reported that an airship descended and struck Judge Proctor's windmill, destroying the structure, causing an explosion and scattering fragments across the garden. Local accounts recorded the event more plainly. The windmill was broken, the well ruined, and iron debris strewn about the yard. The house itself remained intact, yet the immediate grounds were littered with wreckage. Splinters of wood, charred fragments, and peculiar metallic sheets lay across the soil. The fragments resembled thin leaves of foil, light as cigarette paper, yet stubbornly resilient. When bent, they returned to their original shape. The blacksmith attempted to join them with a tin solder, but the bond failed. Magnets offered no reaction. Mixed among the wreckage were small black rods, resembling graphite sticks scattered and pressed into the clay. The explosion was judged by its scent and by the indentations left in the ground. There had been no bright flame, no sweeping fire that consumed the orchard. Instead, fragments lay in an ellipse, their center fixed upon the stone base of the windmill. The stone itself had darkened, its surface smoothed as though it had been rubbed with the slow burn of wax until it gleamed. The most disquieting discovery lay among the shards of strange metal. According to 3 witnesses present at first light, there was a small body unlike any child and unlike any animal. Its height was less than a meter. Its clothing appeared thick, woven like coarse sailcloth, yet unrecognized by touch or sight. The pastor's notes, echoed in the records of a member of the burial team, were brief. Buried unknown pilot. Faith not determined. The grave was placed in the older portion of the cemetery, near the southern wall, beneath a rough stone lacking inscription. Attention soon turned to the well. Its water, once ordinary, took on a bitter taste, metallic and touched with the scent of kerosene, though the farm's supply of oil had not changed. On that very day, the well was sealed with boards, and within a week it was closed permanently beneath stone and clay. The remains of the windmill were dismantled, its parts carted away, and its support taken down. In the ledger of expenses by the judge's name stood the entry, 3 days' labor, dismantling, payment rendered. The newspaper account, signed only with the initials of a correspondent, gave the story both breadth and time. April 17th, morning. It also spoke of papers marked with unknown characters, discovered near the wreck's remains. These papers did not survive. No papermakers in the region were ever found to have seen or handled them. What followed took the shape of a swift clearing and a gradual forgetting. The garden was cleaned thoroughly. The children were warned not to bring the smaller fragments into the house. The larger plates of metal were stacked near the fence, where they remained until some were eventually hauled away for scrap years later. During a wartime campaign for collecting metal, much of what was left disappeared into the effort. In the blacksmith's records 2 years afterward, there was an entry that read simply, "Gray sheet, tested, no result, value, none." The well was never reopened. The family turned to a new source of water at the far end of the yard. Near the sealed stone, they planted peach trees. It was said that on hot days, standing over the covered well, one did not feel the cool breath of dampness rising, but instead a faint, dry warmth, as though the ground itself exhaled heat. Testimonies about the small pilot became shorter and more careful. The pastor, invoking Christian duty, recorded it only as a burial without mention of faith. In the cemetery registers, lines of names and small crosses marked the families, but one row remained blank. In the margins, penciled lightly, appeared a single word: unknown. No arguments arose about whose child it might have been, for no family in the county had declared anyone missing. The wave of airships moved on through other districts. Newspapers filled with accounts of searchlights, wandering lights, and cigar-shaped forms passing overhead. In Aurora, within a month, the news returned to the rhythm of farming reports. The loss was reduced to a broken windmill and a spoiled well. The recovery was measured in a replanted garden and a fresh source of water. Decades passed. In the drought of the 1930s, a neighbor attempted to open the old well again. The water, he later recalled, smelled of kerosene. The stone was placed back over the mouth. By the spring of 1945, little remained of the original orchard beyond a few gnarled trees. A new road had cut across the corner of the property. The old residents moved away or passed on, and the only memory of the incident lingered in boxes of paper stacked in the dust of attics. In the early 1970s, research groups fascinated by the old tales of airships arrived in Aurora, carrying tape recorders and notebooks. There was nothing to hide. There was also nothing left to hide. The The Cemetery Association guided them to the older section, pointing out landmarks. On one unmarked grave rested a small stone with a scratched figure resembling an elongated diamond. Within months, the stone vanished, taken by unknown hands. Metal detectors produced faint and infrequent signals. Thin plates unearthed from the garden strip crumbled when exposed to air. A laboratory report from one group described aluminum fragments with traces of silicon and zinc, consistent with 20th century industrial material. Another analysis stated high purity, no signs of processing, heterogeneous structure. The contradictions were dismissed as contamination, as 7 decades had introduced and removed many forms of metal from the soil, not all of them traceable to April of 1897. Ground-penetrating radar was not commonly available, so the investigators relied on soil probes and resistance readings. In one section near the southern wall, the measurements revealed anomalous density less than a meter below the surface. Permission to exhume was denied. The State Commission settled for placing a plaque with a careful phrase, "The legend endures." At the house built on the site of the former orchard, new owners reopened the long-sealed well. Records from the 1970s preserved a brief note. The water tasted bitter, with an odor of oil. The well was shut again, later filled and sealed entirely. On microfilm copies of newspapers from that era, the Dallas Correspondence Report was reproduced in compilations about mysterious craft. It became the nucleus of the legend: the windmill, the well, the airship, the small pilot, the burial. Attempts to recover the papers with unknown symbols yielded nothing. No archival paper from the pastor's quarters survived. Rain and mice had already erased what might once have been there. At the turn of the 20th to the 21st century, expeditions to Aurora were conducted with greater organization. The equipment had become more precise: ground-penetrating radar, magnetometers, gamma counters. The radiation background registered as natural. The magnetic survey showed an even field. A few narrow strands of deviation appeared near the old fences, explained easily by the presence of rusted nails buried long ago. During one season, the radar produced an image resembling the outline of a small irregular cavity at a depth equal to the span of a hand. The soil was dense clay with inclusions of limestone. The Cemetery Association permitted only surface inspections. A formal petition for exhumation was returned without approval, citing respect for the resting ground and the absence of legal grounds. The orchard was examined again. At the spot where the windmill base had once stood, the concrete revealed smooth surfaces, strangely polished, while the edges crumbled into cracked crust. In one seam, a gleaming filament was discovered, as if sealed by the soil itself. Analysis identified it as an alloy of aluminum, magnesium, and traces of manganese. Isotopic ratios were ordinary, with no evidence of otherworldly origin. Another specimen, a thin flake, displayed an unusual grain structure, suggesting the metal had grown rather than been poured. Simpler explanations were also possible: decades of weathering, leaching, and microcrystallization along the boundary between concrete and earth. The grave marker where a rhombus had once been scratched never reappeared. Efforts to trace its whereabouts ended with the word unknown. Along the central path of the cemetery, a historical marker was eventually placed, phrased with care and neutrality: "The legend does not die." In the archives remained several envelopes containing small fragments. Each carried a date, the name of the finder, and the coordinates of recovery. On the reverse side were laboratory notes: ordinary, contaminated, does not solder, not magnetic. The reports were contradictory not in content but in expectation. Each searcher hoped for the extraordinary and found the commonplace. Or, in the eyes of others, the opposite. Aurora remained a small settlement of a few streets, 2 stores, and a cemetery. The wind structures were different now, built of metal and produced in series. The old well by the orchard became part of the landscape, where the grass grew denser and higher than in the surrounding fields. In the evenings, when the wind moved through the frames, the sound resembled music without melody, a shifting resonance that never settled into form. The legend survived on paper, faded notes, ledgers of expenses, church records with margins where the word unknown had been written in pencil. In photographs from the 1970s, a small stone still stood by an unremarkable grave. In photographs from the 1990s, it was gone. Laboratory reports contained rows of standard entries, broken occasionally by words such as unusual or non-conforming. Objections and amendments, layered through the decades, formed neither a final disproof nor a confirmation. What remained from that April were objects, actions, and silence. The objects had scattered into envelopes and boxes, flakes and sheets of metal cataloged and stored. The actions were precise and efficient: the closing of a well, the quiet burial, the clearing of a yard. The silence persisted in the respect given to blank spaces and in the absence of a hunger for spectacle in a place where families continued to live. Those who arrived in later years sometimes placed temporary instruments, microphones set in the ground near the old foundation. The recordings were long and meticulous, marked carefully with times and durations. They captured the wind, the insects, the faint motor of a distant vehicle, and the steps of the observers themselves. There was nothing that could be called a repeating signal from the earth below. Only familiar sounds, the most striking of which was a low breath-like gust, like the exhalation of a large bellows, followed once again by silence. The reconstruction of events could never become definitive. The date and location were established. The windmill was destroyed. The well was sealed. The burial was noted at the edge of the field. The newspaper had recorded it. The laboratories had labeled it. The marker had been placed. Between these points lay an expanse where every interpretation had to submit to the tone of the land, without clamor, without certainty, with cautious attention to detail. Through the years, the legend taught the difference between the weight of light and the weight of words. Thin plates that refused soldering rested in envelopes beside ordinary aluminum. Both weighed the same in the hands of someone who had come not through sensational headlines, but through respect for the penciled word unknown. Perhaps the most enduring trace left by the fall near the windmill was the discipline of documentation and the recognition that sometimes at the center of a story lies not an explanation, but an empty space beneath a stone, closed off from wind and from time.